Is medieval anti-Semitism creeping back into the church? And if so, where? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is brought to you by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So if you're looking to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode, or just go ahead, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. You'll have a discount already applied there at checkout. You'll just have to look for a little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. But let's dig into today's topic of conversation, anti-Semitism, but not just traditional anti-Semitism, which we are seeing everywhere across the spectrum for a variety of reasons, but more specifically anti-Semitism in the church. And actually, believe it or not, this isn't new. We're going back not a few 100 years or so, but actually into the medieval times, right? To start talking about where the root of anti-Semitism really started in the church, but also, again, how is it manifesting itself again today? Joining me to discuss all that and more is Chloe Sparwith. Chloe, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Very excited for today's topic of conversation, Chloe. I know you just wrote a really good article over at Real Clear Religion, digging into all this and more. But before we jump into your article, just do the Brian Nichols Show audience a favor. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about why you're so fascinated, not just on this greater anti-Semitism topic, but let more in the church, right? This is something that is an area, candidly, we really never discussed here in the show. So I'd love to hear kind of how you got focused and passionate about that specific area.
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me on. So I'm in Atlanta. I'm moving to DC shortly, though, because I'm currently working as the Congressional Affairs Coordinator for the Israel Allies Foundation. So stepping into this type of work full time, I'm just really passionate about Jewish-Christian relations. I'm very active in my church here, and I started going to Israel about really the very beginning of college, and I've been back a ton of times to volunteer, since the war started and all of that. But I've really specifically gotten passionate about bringing Jewish and Christian communities together. As I talk about in the article, we have a little bit of a weird history sometimes, but I think when we work together, really good things happen. And so that's the work that I'm in, and that was what inspired me to write this piece.
Very cool. Well, before we jump into the article, I'm just a little bit, more curious. Let's talk more about your kind of focus here on the Christian-Jewish relationship. So I know you mentioned there, when we tend to work together, some pretty exciting things happen. Highlight a few of those areas, because I think just kind of setting the stage today of what you're looking at as, concrete goods, right? Like this will help people better understand as we go back in time, right? Looking at your article, again, what you're referring to, and more of how a positive Christian-Jewish relationship in your perspective can yield positive outcomes.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking about historical anti-Semitism usually comes from a place of kind of otherizing Jews. And I think that for a lot of history in different places in the world, the Jewish communities in different areas did tend to be kind of pushed to the side or otherized, like I said. And even in the United States, we see kind of like the leftovers of, like there's in my communities in Atlanta, there's a Jewish country club. And this summer I helped organize an event with a rabbi, a pastor, somebody from the Israeli consulate, and then a good friend of mine who does Christian outreach for the organization Stand With Us. And we brought everybody together for a panel event. They talked about Jewish-Christian relations, why it's important to, make friends, talk, have hard conversations and whatnot. And the rabbi was talking about, he gets the feeling sometimes that people think that maybe their Jewish neighbors keep to themselves, and there's a lot of misunderstanding there. And he was saying, it's not that we don't like, our other neighbors and want to be friendly and get to know you, but there are still a lot of people, especially in the South, who remember a time where Jewish people weren't allowed in different facilities and public spaces. And so he says, people always ask me, like, why is there a country club that was started by Jewish people for Jewish people? And he says, because there's a lot of people who remember a time where we weren't allowed in the normal quote unquote country clubs. And so it's just an institution that kind of started. And so, that's a long-winded answer to explain and use that example of why I think interfaith and cross-cultural dialogue is so important. Not to say that Jewish Americans and Christian Americans have different cultures. We maybe have a different religion, but we're all Americans. But things like that, where I just think in a time where things are really, really tense right now on the world stage, domestically, on college campuses, even in, religious circles, getting to know your neighbor and realizing that they're not that different from you, as cheesy as that sounds, and getting to know where they're coming from and why they have certain hesitations around certain things really puts things into perspective. And I think seeing the human face behind kind of the headlines and the TikToks and things like that.
Well, and Chloe, elephant in the room, right? Like what we just saw happen over the past few years in the Gaza Strip. I'm sure that there is a whether it be a conscious or an unconscious connection between those who are just Jewish in faith versus those who are Israeli, right? And Zionist in persuasion. And I'm wondering if that plays into the PR battle for Israel was absolutely lost over the past few years with what was taking place in the Gaza conflict. And I'm wondering if for especially the younger generations, where today we're seeing a lot more of rising anti-Semitic ideas and persuasions, I'm wondering if watching what happened in Israel, that in their brain, again, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, connected the Jewish people by and large across the globe with things they disagreed with that were happening over in the Gaza Strip. What are your thoughts there?
It's 100% an issue, and it's a good conversation to have, because on one hand, Israel is the world's only Jewish state. And so, of course, you're going to think about the Jewish people when you think of Israel. Like they are entwined in many ways, even though, you can be Israeli and not Jewish. You can be Israeli and be Christian or Muslim, and you can be Jewish and not Israeli. Those things are true. It's still, though there's I want to say there's like over 55 states that are not, well, they're not legally defined as Muslim, but like they are heavily Muslim majority countries. There are, also tens of Christian countries. And there are certain countries around the world that are legally Christian countries, or they are legally Muslim countries, where like they have an official head of state who is a religious leader, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard because, I want to say, like, yeah, while you can't necessarily think of Israel without thinking of Judaism, the way that we're seeing, extreme prejudice and even violence against Jewish people because of associations with the state of Israel is really scary. And I think where you see the anti-Semitism creep in, for instance, is okay, there's things that the Israeli government has done, whether you agree with Netanyahu or not, whether you agree, all of that stuff, whatever the politics of Israel it is, whatever you think about it, there are things people disagree with. But
Which, by the way, just to interject, over in Israel, there is a lot of debate around Netanyahu, say that 10 times fast, Netanyahu as a political figure, just himself. He almost he is facing impeachment right now, right?
There's all kinds of things going on. Side note, I went on a date with an IDF soldier one time, and excuse me, losing my voice, and he was like, want to go by the protest at Netanyahu's house? Like, nobody has more qualms and more loud opinions than Israelis about their government. But like the point is, there's things going on in Israel that people don't like, but you're seeing all around the world violence against Israelis being banned from public spaces, from concerts, from soccer fields. The pride parades that we saw this summer in New York, there was like official memos put out saying, like, Jewish people, you can come, but not if you're a Zionist. Meanwhile, there's a lot of people who don't like the Russian government, a lot of people who don't like Vladimir Putin, spoiler alert, but you don't see all around the world people banning Russians from activities or people online, talking about the inherent evil of the Russian people and stuff like that. And so that's where you can see kind of
You've spent your whole life building something meaningful, a career, a family, a legacy. But none of that matters if your health can't keep up. And the truth is, as we age, our body's natural production of nitric oxide, which is vital for circulation and heart function, declines sharply. And that drop increases your risk for high blood pressure, poor oxygen flow, and even cognitive decline. You don't feel like yourself, and no doctor seems to have an answer that doesn't involve more prescription medication. And that's why I recommend Cardio Miracle, because it's an all-in-one blend of nitric oxide boosters like L-arginine, L-citrulline, organic beets, and more that support your cardiovascular system, brain function, and your immune response. It's not about reversing time, it's about giving your body what it needs to keep showing up strong. You've worked too hard to feel like you're fading. So, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, click the link in the show notes, or go to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS and get back in control of your health. And look for the little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols on the Cardio Miracle homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
The anti-Semitism kind of creeping in more so than just like disagreeing with the leaders of a country.
Right. Well, and that's today, right? Let's jump back in time. Here we get into our time machine. Let's go back to medieval times, and we're going to talk more specifically about anti-Semitism in the church, which this is the thesis of your article, again, over at Real Clear Religion. Link will be in the show notes, folks. So please go ahead and check it out and support Chloe. But Chloe, just kind of give us the groundwork here. Like, tell us more about where this anti-Semitism, even back in medieval times, started, and help us better understand, I guess, like the actual ramifications both in the church, but also how that reflected societally.
Yeah, the biggest one that we can start with that kind of, I would think, started all of the anti-Semitism within the church is the idea that Jewish people are Christ killers. And that's a whole nother can of worms that we could talk about. But that's the main thing that has been driving it. And then you've seen the ramifications of that at different periods in history. So like, for example, during the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, he originally started trying to convert Jewish people, talking to rabbis, trying to convert them to Christianity. And when they refused, then he put out decrees to the public saying, go burn down the synagogues, run the rabbis out of town, all of that stuff. Some really bad stuff. And there was a lot of violence against not medieval, but Jewish communities during the Protestant Reformation period. In medieval times, just weird stuff that like Jewish community members were kidnapping young Christian children and using their blood and body parts and whatnot to make matzo ball soup, like just ridiculous stuff. That weirdly enough,
where did that sentiment come from? Like, it just like, and I'm not trying to like really dig into a question maybe you don't have answers to, but like it just seems like this is a reoccurring theme throughout history. Why? Like, why is it always the Jews that seem to get picked on?
It is. You're right. They tend to always be kind of the world's scapegoat. I mentioned in the article, they're always made out to be whatever society doesn't like at a time. They tend to be the scapegoat of politicians, of community members. I think a lot of it is because, like I talked about in the beginning, just otherizing Jewish people, going way back. They're from the land of Israel. Jews are from Judea, but were kicked out after, the destruction of the Second Temple. And then, what we call any Jewish people who are not in Israel, who are around the world, it's called like the diaspora. And so I think there was a sense of, okay, these people aren't from, there's a sense of like, they aren't one of us, they aren't from here. So like Jews in Europe were otherized. And not that there weren't other, immigrants moving into Europe during medieval times, but that was kind of the sense, I think, always the sense of you're not from here, you don't belong. And we see this echoing now with like people accusing Jewish people of, dual loyalty. They're not, they can't be fully loyal to the United States because they're Jewish and there's a Jewish state and that type of thing. Some people really do think it's a religious conspiracy that because, the Jewish people, some believe are God's chosen people, that the devil goes against them extra hard. That's another, conversation for another time. But things like that. But yeah, it is very weird. It's throughout history, you see this repeated over and over, whether it's medieval Europe, whether it's during the Protestant Reformation, whether it's the Holocaust hundreds of years later in Germany, whether it's anti-Semitism in the Middle East. There's pretty much no Muslim majority country today where Jews really live and exist anymore. And so it is, you're right, it's a very recurring theme. And the roots of it, I don't know, there's many arguments of where it comes from.
So going back to your article, I know we're talking about medieval anti-Semitism. Let's fast forward to, we talked about just anti-Semitism by and large today, but where are we seeing it today in the church? Are you saying more specifically like, the Catholic Church? Are we talking just more in general Christianity by and large? Help us better understand that.
A lot of it, and what I talk about in the article is a lot of it is Christian political circles. We're seeing a lot of Christian or commentators or politicians who profess to be Christian making Jewish people the targets of a lot of their attacks. And I want to start this out by saying that, bringing it back to Israel, because it always gets brought back to Israel, in criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. Criticizing Israeli policies or the government is not anti-Semitic. But we're seeing this really weird focus from, again, I would say mostly Christian political commentators who are popular amongst American Christians, really, really weirdly focusing on Israel as a state, demonizing it. And that it started with Israel more, but it's trickling down into back to, you're seeing on TikTok a lot of young people making TikToks about, going back to like the origins of Judaism and trying, really it's this weird, like making them out to be people of the devil and propositioning the Jewish people as the enemies of Christianity. And we're seeing a beautiful rise in, church attendance and Christianity within young people. And that's a really good thing. But, whenever you get a surge of something, you're also going to get you'll get a pocket of people who are really, really hardcore to the extent that they're against people who are not going along with the hardcoreness of whatever they're into. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it does. I want to maybe just focus more because the argument you're laying out, it feels very much like, I guess, the greater argument we were talking about earlier with the anti-Semitism by and large. Like maybe it's not necessarily rooted in a true hatred of the Jewish people necessarily, as it is there is a connection to the American-Israeli relationship where, from a policy perspective, right, we're giving how many billions of dollars, every year just as a line item in our budget to Israel. And then on top of that, basically supplying all of the military, resources that they're leveraging, like their Iron Dome, for example. That's all pretty much American provided. So like there is, I think, a political identity that people have that if they are Christian, that sometimes those worlds may cross, right? And I'm not sure if that leads into again, be unconscious or conscious. And this is I guess you can't really ever tell what's actually happening inside of someone's own soul. But like, if they're just putting those two worlds together and then creating a generalization of Jewish person equal bad versus I don't like the United States giving billions of dollars to the state of Israel to do acts that maybe I personally find morally or ethically reprehensible, right? Then me disagreeing with that doesn't make me anti-Jewish. It just makes me anti-certain policy based on what another government is doing that just happens to be a Jewish government. But I mean, to the other part of I don't even know. I've never really dug into this whole other side of like Christians versus Jews behind the scenes. That's not something I've really ever looked into. But I mean, you're saying that that's part of it. Help me, I guess, understand more. I'm completely ignorant on this specific subsection of a topic. So like, where is this just basic, like generalized Christian versus Jew battle, I guess, coming from? Like, where's that notion come from?
Yeah, and I think as much as, I guess, before I get into that, I do want to note, like, while I do think there has been a huge surge in anti-Semitism post the start of the October 7th war, anti-Semitism was a huge problem before that. I think people just tend to use Israel as a means to criticize the Jews and Jewish people and having, branding it as something else.
Gotcha.
But when it comes to the religious side of things, it is, because Jesus was a Jew, born in the land of Israel, there's the weird religious origins of it that we're seeing resurface today was that, okay, Jesus was a Jew, but he, came here, born, Christianity started, and the people who, after that, who, converted to Christianity or began to follow Jesus were God's new chosen people. And the people that didn't were, who said, no, we're Jesus is not the Messiah. We're staying Jewish, that type of thing. They're looked at as like the betrayers, like they didn't follow Christ, they betrayed him, that type of thing. And it wasn't a problem within, the first couple of 100 years after the life of Jesus. But once Christianity became, mainstream and powerful, that's when you started seeing, okay, like the people who are not falling in line, they're not just not of our religion, or they don't just misunderstand Jesus, like they are the enemies. And that's where it started from. And, America's different now and Europe's different now, where we're not really governed by religion. Like, America still, there's a lot of Christians here.
But it's a very secular country.
Yes, but we're a very secular country. But back then, from, the medieval times to during the Protestant Reformation, like society was religion. Like European societies were Christian. And so Jewish people who, it's different than being like a Hindu or something where they really have nothing to do with Jesus. Jews are seen as, they are specifically the people.
They're part of the story.
Yes, who looked at Jesus and said no.
Okay.
And that's where a lot of it comes from. And it's resurfacing today into some pretty ugly things.
Well, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that, but I personally have never heard of this before. So that's why I'm very much I'm fascinated that this is a sentiment that is more on the Christian I'm gonna say the Christian right, just to generalize here, but like I guess I haven't seen this. Like, is this something that's popping up? You're seeing online? Is this actually in the churches? Where are we seeing this happen?
Well, a lot of times because it's not explicit, it's not fashionable to start coming out on Twitter, and at least it hasn't been until very, very recently, to explicitly proclaim your Jew hatred in the form of the Jews killed Jesus and therefore like my Jewish neighbor sucks. It hasn't been like that, and that's where I think that's where people start talking about, like, going back to the the difference between like criticizing Israel and being anti-Semitic. Like it's easier to veil it, but where we're starting to see it, and like where I bring up again the political commentators and whatnot, like Candace Owens, yes, she criticizes Israel, and criticizing Israel, once again, not anti-Semitic, but what she starts doing, well, she's at this point just talking about, she is saying, she mentioned something about Jewish people in medieval times killing Christian children and using them for matzo ball soup. So like she is coming out and saying it. But where she's, talking about Israel, like Netanyahu is possessed by a demon and it's a demonic nation and the people of Israel are demonic, that type of thing, where that's where it crosses into. Okay,
she said that?
Yeah, she said Netanyahu is possessed by a demon. That's where we're talking about Israel, but there's fragments of Jews are from the devil and they don't like Jesus brought back into modern discourse. You don't see a lot of other, you don't see some of these commentators talking about other countries and, bringing in the religious aspects of it, like the demon stuff or like
Putin is a demon or
yeah, Putin's a demon or like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And again, I might mention this in the article. She is a professing Christian woman, and she does bring it into things. But you'll notice when she gets into arguments with like Mark Levin, for example, who is, a Jewish commentator who is very pro-Israel. When she gets into arguments with him, she ends the arguments with Christ is king, or I'm praying for you, and that type of thing, where you don't really see that type of language in other political discourse with, Congress people or commentators who are Christian. You don't see them arguing with other people and ending it with I'm praying for you, or it's when the religious aspects are brought into the discourse around Israel, that you see kind of some of that stuff. But going back to like, the everyday things, there is a dark side of TikTok, and the internet now that is growing. That is, they've put we're just criticizing Israel behind them, and it is now explicitly like you Jew, bad stuff like that. There's a lot of talking about the Talmud and taking things from the Talmud, which isn't even really like, it's not Jewish theology, out of context, and saying like, this is what the Jews believe about you. And you'll see videos of people trying to talk about, basically saying like the Jews act like they're your friends, but really they hate Christians, and stuff like that. There's an IDF, I don't want to say influencer, but he's an IDF reservist. He's about my age. He served in the current war. Sam Friedman, look him up, anybody who's out there. But he, when he's posting about different things with Israel and the hostages and whatnot, sometimes afterwards he will then post just like, what's the word? Like a hodgepodge, just a mosh pit of things that people have commented with the stuff under Israel. And it's all like, F you, you Jew, you like, it's stuff like that. And it's a lot of times coming from young Christians who, again, are like, we're finding purpose in the church and in Christ, and that's phenomenal. But that doesn't mean you have to find an enemy. And I think people are seeing Jewish people as the enemy now, in a religious context. And it's, again, it starts with the darker corners of the internet, with people harassing Jewish influencers, or, saying that Netanyahu's literally possessed by a demon. But the more and more that this stuff
it's like the opposite of touched by an angel, possessed by a demon.
The more and more that this stuff is normalized and like it just becomes a part of our normal discourse. Like Candace Owens is still, with all the stuff that she's saying, she's still like one of the top podcasts in the United States. Like you look at the Spotify chart, she's way up there. It's becoming normalized. And so it's, you look back at history with, the Holocaust is the big example that people bring up. And you want to say like, how did we get to the point where normal church-going people who went to church every day, or not every day, but every Sunday, were then okay when their Jewish neighbors started disappearing and getting taken to concentration camps? It's this slippery slope where if you start normalizing calling Jews demons, like that's okay, and bringing up all these like bad anti-Semitic historical myths, normalizing those things and making it like just a part of everyday dialogue, and nobody's going to bat an eye, especially in the church. It's not that surprising when violence starts happening against your Jewish neighbors and stuff like that. And that's how, this stuff starts. I'm not saying that today that like there's American pastors all over the country who are, preaching kill the Jews. That's not what's happening. But like it starts with the internet. It starts with politics. But you did see during the Holocaust, I'm not saying all of them, but like large parts of like the German church were anti-Semitic, preached Nazi propaganda, and went along with the Nazis. And there were some really, really standout pastors and Christians who did help the Jewish people. There's a whole museum in Jerusalem dedicated to Christians during the Holocaust who saved Jewish people and stood up for them. But it was a problem that actually did end up creeping into literally like church sermons. And that's where we don't want to get to here.
So just a couple of things I want to go back through and just kind of talk through, and I have some thoughts, but I'm not sure how to put them together yet. So maybe talking through it will help. But going back to the first part, like the fact that there is this growing anti-Semitic, the tropes, as you mentioned, the demonic Netanyahu versus the lack of the demonic Putin or someone in that kind of spirit, the demonic, al-Assad or the demonic Osama bin Laden, right? Like that that type of talk is noticeably absent, right? So I think that is definitely something to call out, and just the underlying Jew hatred that you mentioned that your buddy Sam.
Sam, yeah, we're not. I follow him on Instagram, and we have mutual friends. We're not actually like good friends, but
friend adjacent, right? But like the fact that he gets that content where it's deplorable Jew hatred, like absolutely horrible and something that I think rightfully should be called out. But then going back to the other side where it was, you mentioned like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think there is, and I'm not 100% if it's deserved or not, but there is a growing sentiment where there is a belief that Israel has its control in some way over the United States government by either nefarious means, well, mostly by nefarious means. You see this raised up with AIPAC with its donations towards respective politicians. That's become almost a calling card at this point for any politician when they're doing a talk around Israel, right? That immediately you'll have the AIPAC tracker Twitter account. They'll reply with a screen grab of how much money they've received, if any, from AIPAC. So like you see that. You have the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theory, where it's, Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent working, at the behest of the Israeli government and trying to blackmail all these noted American political figures and noted personalities to help, grab control of the powers that be in the American infrastructure and American system. You have the narrative that Jews control Hollywood, Jews control the media, right? All this stuff. So when you start to go beyond, well, we're giving XYZ dollars to Israel, and then you flip it more to the other side of saying there is a growing belief that Israel, specifically Israel, which just happens to be, to your point, the only Jewish country in the world, that there's a growing belief that that specific country is blackmailing, using nefarious, purposes behind the scenes to control and dictate our policy. That sentiment has been growing. And then when you have folks like Mark Levin, who are American by birth, and yet on the other side are Jewish by religion, which is fine, but then advocating pro-Israel to the point where some folks view that as saying, hey, time out. You're an American first. At least you should be, right? Because you were born here. You claim to be an American citizen. And with that, there are rights. But I would say there is also privileges that come with that. And amongst those is, you if there ever comes a head-to-head, you don't have the ability, when I say the ability, but you don't have the opportunity to just go out and say, I'm going to support this country's interests, not just like as a standalone interest, but in many instances at the detriment to my own country, right? And I guess that's where the Marjorie Taylor Greene side, when she adds in the Christ is King, right? I'm wondering if that's almost like, hey, you're Jewish, and the outward impression is, Mark, that you're supporting Israel based on religious like connotations, right? Because you're Jewish, so you're using your your religious beliefs to dictate how foreign policy and public policy will dictate our spending, right? Okay, I'm going to do the same thing and argue that America is a Christian country, and that I, Marjorie Taylor Greene, am a Christian. Therefore, I'm saying Christ is King. I'm going to cheer my religion in supporting a specific policy. So I think that's where more of the head-to-head is coming from. I don't think it's necessarily just outright anti-Semitism. I think it is this growing belief that there is religious undertones into support for specific policy that is coming at the expense of the American taxpayer. If you're a business owner, do you ever open your phone bill and feel like you need a decoder ring? Regulatory recovery fee, support access surcharges, platform licensing. Half the stuff on there is just made up jargon for we felt like charging you more, and here it is. And don't worry, other folks are over it too. And that's why I am recommending you Level 365. They're upfront, no hidden fees, no surprise line items, no gains. You pay what you agreed to, period. And if you need help, a real human answers the phone. Clean pricing, real support. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but here we are. And when you have Americans who, I think you look at America just in general, and we do, I think it's without argument, we are a Christian nation at our core. Our founding principles and our founding constitution, like our guiding documents, they're all based in Christian ethos. So, like, to then see this other religion, right, come in from now this only Israel or the only Jewish country, in the appearance of potentially having any fingers in our government or pulling the strings in certain areas to dictate policy here at home, I think that's what's breeding the distrust and the concern versus just, I don't like Jewish people. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I hear what you're saying. And I have 3 points that I will try to make quick. So I know I've been rambling. To talk about
this is why we do this. That's okay.
The first thing I would say that, okay, yes, America is, and I can see where you're going with the Marjorie Taylor Greene line of thinking. We are a Christian country, and that like our founders were Christian and the majority of Americans are Christian. But like the First Amendment is explicit in that you can't make laws establishing, the respecting of one religion government-wise over others. So like,
it's only from the federal government though, right?
I don't think so. Even though like in the state governments, I don't believe you can still say that like, like Georgia is a Christian state of the United States.
But isn't that kind of like what Utah does? Like they're a Mormon state? I could be completely out to lunch here. I thought that was a thing.
They're a Mormon majority state, but I don't think like the Utah government can do anything specifically like we are the government of the Mormons. I might be wrong. I would think maybe some like local places, but no, I'm pretty sure that the federal law supersedes state, like, because I think it's like whatever is explicitly in the Constitution about the powers of the federal government, that is explicit and supersedes state law. And then if it's not explicitly explicitly,
don't worry, we can get through it,
mentioned, then that is where it becomes a state thing. So I would say that like she's a congresswoman and she's allowed to express her religious beliefs, and that's awesome. That's America.
By the way, I looked it up. It's so our friends over at Perplexity, not a sponsor, but hey, always welcome. Yes, the First Amendment applies to states, prohibiting states from recognizing or establishing a state religion, not just the federal government. When the Bill of Rights was originally enacted, its protections, including the Establishment Clause, applied only to Congress and the federal government. However, this is where I missed this. However, the ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868, the Supreme Court has held that the First Amendment's provisions, including the prohibition on the establishment of religion, are, quote, incorporated and apply equally to state and municipal governments. So there's the answer.
Yeah. And then with that also, like, Israel was founded, like the modern state of Israel. There was a very old state of Israel where the Jewish people did come from, but like the modern state of Israel was founded to be a safe haven for the Jewish people, and so it exists in large part to protect the Jewish people. But it also doesn't mean that it doesn't. I want to mention that it doesn't mean that it also doesn't protect other people in its country. Like they have, I think like 20% of Israel is Muslim Arab. There's lots of religious diversity there, but I digress. But apart from that, going back to, people being worried about Israel controlling America and AIPAC and all of that. I think what people don't realize is, first of all, AIPAC is like an American-led PAC. You can start a PAC for literally anything, and AIPAC is an American group.
But you get why people are concerned,
in support of Israel.
Right?
Yes, but it's not like AIPAC is Israelis that were funded to come here and like start taking over the American government.
No, but that's my point though, is that like the notion is there is a group that is specifically focused on supporting another country's interests that just happen to be Jewish. I think that's the argument.
Yeah, but I also think like there are all kinds of PACs out there that talk about other countries' interests, and I don't know. I just think, but I do understand it, that it's like it's a big thing. They're talking, it's American.
I'm not trying to I'm not trying to dictate one way or another. I'm just trying to prescribe, or not prescribe. I'm not trying to prescribe. I'm trying to diagnose, right? Like I think that's the thing, is that it's not just like anti-Semitism. I think there are things that we have to like have some hard conversations and just like say, pause. Is it anti-Semitism, or is there something else that we have not talked about? And I think that's where this conversation is so important, because like it is very easy at times just to say, oh, that's anti-Semitism. And it's become a running joke with like the ADL, like they'll reply to anything and they'll call it anti-Semitism at this point. So like, that is why I think it is important to like pay attention when we're talking these very charged conversations, not you and I, just like the generalized anti-Semitism conversation. Like we need to, I think, understand, like, is it policy based or is it true Jew hatred? If it's true Jew hatred, I hear you, right? Like what you talked about earlier with the screen grabs, that's awful. That's there's no justified like argument. There's no policy position there. That's just garbage, like mental brain rot. But then on the other side, if there are people who just have legitimate concerns on policy, if you have a legitimate concern regarding AIPAC, right, that in itself is not anti-Semitic. That's just identifying that there's an organization that has religious undertones in its trying to raise money and influence American politicians to support another country. Like that, just from a political perspective, like if you just follow that logic train, yeah, like I get why people would be against that, whether or not it's controlling or our government, or it's like an arm of the Israeli government. That's not the conversation. It's more so just, why are we allowing a group that is trying to promote another country's interests by leveraging our politicians and then giving them money? You know what I mean? It just feels, as a normal human being, you hear that and you're like, ew, it just feels icky, right? Like I think that's more it than anything.
Yeah. I get what you're saying.
And you can disagree, by the way. That's okay. You can disagree. I just want to hear it.
I think though, like the AIPAC thing though has been so blown out of proportion, and I don't think that people understand that Israel is literally the size of New Jersey. They have enemy countries all around them who don't like them, and every so often start wars with them. They're
every so often.
like it's par for the course there. Their main focus is survival, and they've done a really good job of surviving in that type of environment. But again, like they're the world's only Jewish country. They're in a region where they're surrounded by mostly Muslim countries who have almost religiously believe that they have the obligation to clear Jews from the land. Like the Israeli government is not, and the Israeli people who love Americans, by the way, by and large, love Americans, they're not like sitting around cooking up, how can we take over the United States? They don't have the time to. They don't have the time to control the media and control Hollywood, which that's always something that blows my mind when people truly think that, because like if you look at any Hollywood celebrity, most of them don't like Israel. So I don't know what they mean. Like I don't know how the Holocaust would have happened and 6 million Jews were wiped off the face of the planet if Jews controlled the governments and the media and all of that. But I think where you can see the why, why is AIPAC big? Why are there other, countries that perhaps could need American help that don't have this type of domestic support? For, like, why aren't there, Americans for Ireland who have, a big pack in that type of thing? I think it really is because while American Jews are, very safe in the United States, at least they have been until recently. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Jewish people because I'm not Jewish, and I don't want to try to sound like I'm talking for a group of people that I'm not a part of. But from what I hear from a lot of people is there is this like historical, generational, familial trauma where the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors in the United States and abroad and other places, they are old, they've grown up listening to their grandparents talk about the Holocaust stories and how their neighbors turned against them and things like that. And how at the time, like, the only place they could escape to was Israel, though pre-World War II, Israel wasn't legally a country. That was just part of, the various empires, whoever controls that area at the time. People who got to Israel for the most part were safe. People who, in Europe who tried to get over to the United States were turned around. We turned around boats of people who tried to escape here, and they ended up dying in concentration camps. So I do think in the back of a lot of the minds of some Jewish people is that at some point, the only people that you can rely on is yourself, and that eventually other people turn. And so I don't want to say Israel is seen as like a backup, but like, and it's not that like AIPAC is trying to like get the American government to work only on behalf of Israel. But I think there is the fear that if America, who is Israel's greatest ally, starts to turn on them, then like there really is no, they're on their own and there's no hope for the future and that type of thing. And like, there's room for, when the world eventually does once again turn on the Jewish people, that they'll have nowhere to go. And I think for the type of people who think, believe that like the state of Israel isn't necessary, we don't need a country for the Jewish people, that it's a bad place, whatever, that type of thing. Not, the animosity towards it and towards the Jewish people here, we're not doing a good job of proving that like they don't need Israel if anti-Semitism is so much on the rise here, if that makes sense. And then, sorry, I know I've been rambling. One more thing, I also do just want to say, with like, yes, the United States does give a lot of support to Israel. We do. They're an ally of ours. They're the only true democracy in the Middle East. They share our values. I, as a woman, would not feel safe probably walking around I, for instance, wouldn't feel safe, walking through the streets of Afghanistan as a lone woman, but I've gone to Israel and I've walked around at 2 a.m. by myself at night and felt absolutely fine. They are very similar to us, and they are fighting our enemies as well. Like, I think people forget that Hamas, Hezbollah, the people surrounding Israel who hate them, they also hate us. Israel's just the first target. They want to cleanse the Jews out of that land, and then they'll come for us. So while, yes, we're sending military aid to Israel, they are fighting our enemies on our behalf. That's what a lot of friends that I have who are in the IDF will say is like, where they talk about they don't understand like why some Americans don't like them so much. They're like, we are fighting the people, like we're dying. Our brothers and sisters are dying on the battlefield to fight the people who also will come for you. Like, we're the first line of defense. And when we say like we're sending aid over there and stuff, like, yes, we send them weapons, but like a lot of the time, like it's our like Vietnam era weapons that nobody's using anymore. But we also do get a lot from them. Like, yes, we fund the Iron Dome, but the technology, the state-of-the-art technology from the Iron Dome, Americans have access to all of that as well. That was part of the deal. We would help them fund it, but we get all of that technology. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really good technology. it'd be a little more difficult to build an Iron Dome here, but if we, because we're much larger, but if we ever needed it, like we have the technology. But Israel pretty much now does. Things that like projects that in America help them start, they now do fund themselves. But like the money, that we say goes into paying for Israel's defense and whatnot, it all goes back to American contractors. So even if money is going to Israel for a little while, it goes back to American defense contractors and Americans weapons manufacturers that like the government would be putting money into
how that
anyway.
doesn't make people have warm and fuzzies, right?
What do you mean?
Like just to hear, okay, so my tax dollars are being sent to Israel, which is then being sent to America in our military industrial complex, which is then being resurfaced, in our economy through the defense contractors, which is predominantly going to be more of the wealthier folks already. So like that to your average person, I hear your argument, like, hey, we're getting the technology, like, but your average person hears that and like, great. I had a train derailment happen 3 years ago, and we have chemical spills in our water, and we haven't gotten that fixed yet. Or, oh, we had a hurricane come through a year and a half ago and wipe out my interstate, still not fixed yet. Oh, we had a bridge get hit by a boat over in Baltimore and knock down the entire bridge, and that still hasn't been replaced yet. Like, there are very real problems that we're facing here at home. And your average person, I think, says, why are my tax dollars going overseas, then coming back here, going to military defense contractors, being spread in those economies versus just prioritizing America? And I'll conclude with this, and I'll let you bring us home, Erica. Or Eric, I was just reading an article from a girl named Erica that was making this argument here about the conservative or the comparative support breakdown. She was going through the numbers, and what she outlined was just the insane drop in support of Israel from generation to generation. So Erica dug through the numbers. Ages 65 plus, Chloe, 89% supported Israel. Okay, that checks out. Yep, makes sense. 55 to 64, 84%. So we're still over 80%. 45 to 54, so we're in our Gen X now, 74%. 35 to 44, your older millennial and younger Gen X, 70%. 25 to 34, oldest Gen Z, and then your younger millennials, 65%. Right now, Gen Z, 60% supported Hamas and 40% supported Israel. Like, that's scary, right? And I'll say, it's important to look at that to say, okay, going back to your original point, Israel, they don't want to have to do this by themselves. But if the numbers keep going the way they're going with a 60% of Hamas over a 40% of Israel, coupled with the questions that people who are traditionally very supportive of Israel, which are going to be more of your conservative Christian types, who maybe are starting to ask questions like, why are my dollars going to Israel, then going to the military industrial complex versus my tax dollars going to American issues, solving American problems, actually prioritizing America first? It will breed not an anti-Semitic trope, but rather I think it will breed a distrust of Israel from a policy perspective. And that's just by association going to be a distrust of Jewish actors in that world, which I think, unfortunately, to your point earlier, it will manifest in other ways that are not going to be good. So I think, we have to kind of, again, have that tough conversation. Like, if the numbers are going where they're going and your average person is seeing that as what it is, it's going to breed question marks and confusion and no warm and fuzzies. But that's my final thoughts. What are your final thoughts there, Chloe? Bring us home.
To bring us home, going off of those numbers, absolutely, we have issues domestically in America that need to be focused on and need to be fixed. I've seen firsthand North Carolina things that still haven't been cleaned up from the giant storms of 1-2 years ago. But I also think, as Americans, as pretty much the most powerful country in the world and the country with the most powerful military in the world, and we're an ocean away from a lot of our enemies, and piggybacking off our victory in World War II, we're very used to being safe. Although, my generation, Gen Z, was, we were babies when 9/11 happened, and we were alive for Iraq.
Make me feel old, Chloe. Come
what,
on,
not, we still, American, my generation today, and yours as well, we don't know what it's like to live in actual fear that like our country may not exist and that there's going to be war that is going to be on our doorstep, killing our civilians. We don't know what that's like. And the privilege that comes with that is thinking that funding to the military isn't necessary and that the, defense contractors and factories and whatnot that are producing our militaries and beefing up our military, like we're able to have the privilege of thinking like, oh, it's all just a big scam and, the government wasting our money because people are afraid of us. They're afraid of our big military. And that only comes through, the beefing up of our systems that we talked about with money going into defense contractors and whatnot. So not that the other stuff isn't important. It's just as important. But I also think just because we haven't been alive to see war on our doorstep and we don't remember like, World War II, where like my grandmother has told me like we truly didn't know if we were going to win. We truly like there was a possibility for the large first part of World War II where a lot of people genuinely thought like we might be speaking Japanese or German in 10 years. And we don't know what that's like. So I think it's very easy to just like assume we're cooking, we're safe, we're good, but that really hasn't been the reality for a lot of American history. And I think you can never get too comfortable, if that makes sense.
Chloe, this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you for joining us. And of course, folks, if you want to go ahead and check out more of Chloe's article, I will make sure we include in the show notes her article over at Real Clear Religion. You can see here on the big screen, medieval anti-Semitism is creeping back into the church. Chloe Sparwith, we really appreciate you joining on the show. Folks, if you got some value from today's episode, please do us a favor. Go ahead and give it a share. When you do, you can tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Instagram, on X, and on Facebook. Chloe, where can folks go ahead and find you?
Pretty much everywhere at Chloe Swan with 3 to 4 N's. It varies. That's my middle name. So Chloe Swan.
Look for one of the swans and you will find your way. Awesome. Yes. Well, with that being said, folks, again, if you enjoy the Brian Nichols Show, make sure you've hit subscribe. Head over to your favorite podcast catcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever that may be, and hit subscribe to the Brian Nichols Show. We have over 1,000 episodes with some absolutely phenomenal guests over the past few years. And by the way, you like to watch your shows instead of taking them on the go via podcast? Well, head over to YouTube, to Rumble, to X, to Facebook, and actually you can watch the Brian Nichols Show over on Spotify now. That's pretty darn cool. So head over to your favorite video platform. Again, hit subscribe to the Brian Nichols Show. And of course, hit that little notification bell because every Monday, every Thursday, and every Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, we are live streaming the show over on those respective channels. We will go live at 9 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you've hit that little notification bell. And of course, if you enjoy those episodes or you have questions, you want to get your comments heard, head down below into the comments. I'll make sure I go ahead and give you a response at some point there as soon as I see it. But otherwise, folks, if you want to support the show, best way to do that is to go ahead and support our sponsors, who are the folks who support us, like Cardio Miracle. If you're looking for some supplementation help to help with that ticker, go ahead, scan that little QR code over my shoulder. Or, hey, maybe Cardio Miracle isn't for you. We have a lot of other sponsors over at the website. So head to briannicholsshow.com/sponsors. We have Liquid Freedom Energy Tea. We have Blood of Tyrants Wine, which I don't drink anymore, but I've heard nothing but great things. Our buddy Kenny Cody, he bought a couple bottles like the first time he was on the show. He saw the ad and he's like, dude, I got to get this. Went ahead and bought it, and I think he said it was one of the best wines he ever had. So there you go. Blood of Tyrants Wine, Evil CBD. We have tons of other sponsors there. So one more time, briannicholsshow.com/sponsors. Chloe, any final thoughts or anything you want to say before we say goodbye today?
I don't think so. Just don't go in with bad assumptions about people that you don't know.
There you go. Love it. All right, Chloe, we appreciate you joining the show. And folks, if you enjoyed the show, again, please go ahead and give it a share. But with that, we're going to go ahead and put a pin in today's conversation. That being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Chloe Sparwith. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.